What is up, everybody? It is Friday, September 5th, and it is our final look ahead to Bills versus Ravens. We're going to be getting into this matchup a little bit, talking about some of the key storylines, and I'm joined by Brian Wacker today. He covers the Baltimore Ravens. Wacker, excuse me. I practiced it like multiple times before the show, Brian, and there I go ahead and I screw it up for the Baltimore Sun covering the Ravens. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This is obviously one of the games that I think a lot of football fans have circled on their calendar, and I think the Ravens haven't been shy about saying this is a game that they're very motivated to play, coming off of the loss in the divisional round of the Bills in this stadium 9 months ago or 8 months ago. From your perspective, like, what do you think the general approach is here for this team? There's obviously a lot of frustration about how their season ended a year ago. You know, you look at Lamar Jackson and how good he's been in the regular season, coming off of just an unbelievable statistical season. Yet he sits here going into a pretty important year at 3-5 career in the playoffs. And, you know, what's your general sense about how this team overall and the leadership is approaching this opening matchup on the road against the Bills?
Well, a couple of things. I'll start with Lamar Jackson because with the Ravens, that's where most things start, right? And so when it comes to Lamar, one thing we've heard a lot of this offseason, really ad nauseum over the summer, is that he's much more vocal with his teammates. And that includes, you know, sort of in the huddle, in meeting rooms, in group chats, group texts. So we've seen a more vocal Lamar Jackson. And I actually talked to him about this couple of weeks ago. And one of the things he told me was that his mom had, you know, basically come down on him a little bit and said he needs to go back to how he was when he played youth football back in Florida. And he was very vocal back then. He would, you know, tell guys to essentially get off the field if they weren't trying hard enough or running the right routes and so forth. So from that standpoint, we've seen a little more vocal Lamar Jackson. I think we've also seen somebody now in year 3 of Todd Monken's offense. You know, we really started to see it gel last year, of course, career highs in passing yards and touchdowns with 41. And so, you know, there's this sentiment, I think, okay, this is it. This is Lamar. You know, this is kind of the peak of what we've seen from Lamar Jackson. They think his ceiling is even higher, of course, but you know, we've seen him sort of take this next step in a leadership standpoint. That said, when you move it forward to this game, one of the big storylines, of course, is Mark Andrews. And of course, everybody in Buffalo remembers the drop 2-point conversion. Of course, he had the fumble earlier in that quarter as well, inexplicably. So that's been a big talking point. You know, and I would say this group is, you know, they're trying to treat it like any other game and so forth. But you do get a sense, talking to some of the members of the defense, that there's this underlying frustration with the way that game went down last year, that they want to get that monkey off their back, kind of avenge that loss. Obviously, look, it's week 1, it's the regular season. But I get the sense in talking to a few of the defensive players that, you know, they let that one get away last year, and they don't want to let that happen again.
Yeah, I'm so curious to see like how the game script plays out for the Bills offense, because if you go back to that matchup, like, they didn't do anything spectacular. They made some plays on third down. Josh Allen was a bull in the red zone, as he usually tends to be, and that's kind of how they got ahead. The Baltimore turnovers, and then they just tried to not make any mistakes down the stretch, and that ended up working out for them. But in this game, I feel like similarly to the regular season game between these two teams a year ago, like, the Bills offense is going to have to be a lot more prolific, especially considering some of the injuries on the defensive side, some of the youth that is going to be playing. I mean, I'm very high on TJ Sanders and Deion Walker in the middle. You have Cole Bishop, the second round draft pick, on the back end. But again, you might be starting a rookie 6th-round pick in Dorian Strong at cornerback against what is arguably the best duo in the league in Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. So there's questions to be answered on the defensive side, but offensively, I think the Bills, how they attack the Baltimore defense, which they didn't have a ton of success against last year, is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, one of the things I'm really curious to see how it plays out. This Baltimore defense a year ago was in a bit of turmoil. They had some issues, right? They especially against the pass. Against the run, not so much. They were fairly successful. But that said, in that playoff game, the Bills ran the ball pretty well in that game. I think it was 147 yards, only about maybe 4.5 yards, 4.3 yards per carry. But, that helps keep Lamar Jackson off the field, right? So it'll be very interesting to me to see if Buffalo again leans on James Cook in the legs of Josh Allen and sort of controlling that game and controlling the tempo. And really, from a defensive standpoint for the Ravens, to me, I'll be very curious because I do think they will play a lot more nickel and a lot more dime this year. And that'll be interesting to see if that's the case against the Bills. And if it is, are the Bills able to take advantage of that size differential when you've got smaller defensive backs in there, when you've got 4 cornerbacks, say, on the field? So to me, that's one of the sort of interesting subplots to this game is how that Ravens defense, which, look, last year they were 31st in the league against the pass in terms of yards per game. And they really turned things around last 6 weeks or so of the season. And I think, they've made some other changes, brought in Chuck Pagano to be the secondary coach, brought in a new inside linebackers coach, Tyler Santucci from Georgia Tech. So they made some coaching changes. They've certainly made some personnel changes. And then, of course, Malachi Starks, the first-round safety they took out of Georgia, very highly touted, and so far has sort of looked every bit the part, but he's still a rookie, so you don't know how it's going to play out. So to me, I'm very curious to see how the Ravens approach it from a standpoint of, are they going to play a lot of nickel and a lot of dime looks, and are the Bills therefore going to take advantage of that on the ground?
Very interesting. And there's a little wrinkle that I think Joe Brady could roll out here in the opener in terms of how they construct their roster. I want to get into that in a minute. Before we get there, though, Shout is brought to you by Tops Friendly Markets, and it's football season. So it's time to rush back to the Tops Red Zone, and you can win the GOAT, the greatest of all tailgates, in the Tops Red Zone raffle right now. Shop from over 25 fan favorite brands and get unlimited savings when you purchase brands like Coca-Cola, Heinz, King's Hawaiian, and much more. To find out more, visit topsmarkets.com/redzone. We're also brought to you by Amtrak. Amtrak's Empire Service offers frequent departures daily from Niagara Falls, Buffalo, all the way to New York City. No middle seats, plenty of legroom, reclining seats so you can stretch out, read, work, watch a movie, whatever you need to do. Kids ride 50% off. Riding Amtrak is an experience, a fun and relaxing way to get to your destination. All right, so for the Bills offense, last season they ran the jumbo personnel package more than any team in the league with the extra offensive linemen. I'm sensing a pivot. Now, we have not seen a ton of 13 personnel, which I think is ironic to talk about with you because Baltimore does that so well with their 3 tight ends. Isaiah Likely, we can get to him in a second. But the Bills drafted Jackson Hawes in the 5th round. And hearing Joe Brady talk about the summer that he's had, they're really impressed with him. And I think they might be able to even maybe unlock that running game a little bit more, having him on the field, whether it be in 13, whether it be him acting as the jumbo because of what he could do in the passing game as well. Long term, I'll be interested to see how that affects Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. But for the right now, against this team that the Bills want to try to establish the run against, I'm very curious to see how they deploy that, especially knowing that this is the personnel package that I feel like the Baltimore Ravens have really leaned into over the years. Yeah,
look, and I think from the Ravens' perspective, with that ground game, it'll be interesting to see, who they elevate from the practice squad, for example. Will they elevate somebody like a Brent Urban, a veteran, defensive end, to give them another big body in the middle? Of course, they lost Michael Pierce to retirement in the offseason. He was sort of their the run-stuffing nose tackle. And, so it'll be interesting to see what sort of personnel that Baltimore trots out there because, again, this is a team that when you look at the roster, I think they're going to, like I said, they're going to play a good bit more nickel and dime looks this season. But that said, there are going to be times like when they've got big personnel defensively on the field. So what does that mean for guys like Trenton Simpson, who struggled last year, Roquan Smith, of course, in the middle alongside him, and then guys like Travis Jones and Nnamdi Madubuike. So to me, it's a fascinating matchup to watch. And you mentioned the tight ends. I think it's really interesting from the Ravens standpoint because there's another team, that likes to roll with a few different tight ends. Plus, they've got a fullback in Patrick Ricard. But now they've got a couple of guys who are banged up. You mentioned Isaiah Likely. He won't play. He had foot surgery on August 1st. Still hasn't been back to the practice field this week, so I wouldn't expect him back till probably week 3 at the earliest. And then you look at, of course, you got Mark Andrews and then Charlie Kohler. Then Patrick Ricard, their fullback / tight end, has not practiced all week. We'll see if he's out there today, but I sense that he will likely not play in this game. He hasn't practiced in a couple of weeks. So, it'll be interesting. Again, you have to look to that practice squad, and I think they'll probably elevate one of their tight ends, maybe Mitchell Payton, off the practice squad. They've got a rookie fullback, undrafted free agent that they like a lot, but not sure you want to trot a rookie out there for this game if you don't have to. So, from the tight end standpoint and personnel standpoint for the Ravens, it will be interesting because that's another team that likes to lean on those, 2 tight end looks. And to your point with the Bills having some secondary issues, guys banged up and so forth, do we see more spread out looks from this Ravens offense?
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how they deploy their arsenal of receivers. I mean, obviously DeAndre Hopkins new in the mix there. They're very familiar with Bateman, and Zay Flowers didn't play in the playoff game last year, but they played him quite a bit. It was funny talking to Dorian Strong, the Bills rookie. He remembers playing against him in college. He was a 5-year player at Virginia Tech, so he got some looks at Zay Flowers, at least his first few seasons at Va Tech. He's excited to match up. He might not be excited after the game. We'll see. But in terms of what they can do vertically, you mentioned some of the youth in the defensive backfield. Taylor Rapp, Christian Benford, and Taron Johnson, 3 veteran players that kind of lead that group. But with Bishop and then Strong potentially starting if Tre'Davious White can't go, which it's looking like he won't be able to, that might be something where they look to exploit those matchups. And it's going to come down to the front. Now, I will say the Bills spent a lot of resources on their defensive front. It's going to look completely different than it did 9 months ago. Joey Bosa now rushing on the outside, healthy coming into the season. We'll see how long that lasts. And then you think about some of the other new pieces that's been added, particularly on the inside with TJ Sanders and Deion Walker. That when they drafted Sanders, the first thought on everybody's mind was he'd probably be the backup to Ed Oliver. And I think what we're going to see even in this game, as early as this game, is the 2 of them on third downs and on passing downs rushing together to try to generate a little bit more consistent pressure with 4. They'll still blitz Matt Milano. He'll spy Lamar Jackson at times in this game. But I think to me, that's the biggest key to this game for the Bills is finding a way to generate pressure and affect Lamar. You're probably not going to completely limit what he's able to do, but if you can affect him, that to me is the goal. And we'll see if this new look Bills defensive line can get it done.
Yeah, and that'll be interesting. I just wrote about this for the Baltimore Sun. When you look back at that playoff game from last year, I believe the Bills blitzed 15 times on Lamar's 31 pass attempts and were able to generate 9 pressures out of those 15 blitzes. And when they didn't blitz, they only generated 4 pressures. So it'll be interesting. This offensive line for Baltimore returns pretty much intact. They did lose Patrick McCary, which is kind of a big blow for them. He played left guard for them last year, but was a jack of all trades, could play anywhere on the line and was sort of that valuable 6th man, swing tackle or plug and play guy off the bench. And they don't really have that this year. They return the rest of the group, which includes Andrew Voorhees, who was the starting guard beginning of last season at the left side, but then got injured and got replaced by McCary. But the rest of the group is intact, and that includes Ronnie Stanley, who's coming off a Pro Bowl season, second-year right tackle Roger Rosengarten, who's been fairly steady, I would say, for a guy who's just in his second year. Of course, Tyler Linderbaum, the All-Pro center. And, right guard, Daniel Falele, he's had some moments. He's had some highlight reel moments that you don't want to have. And he's a massive human being, very unorthodox for that position, 6'5", like 380. I mean, just a enormous human being. So not the fastest guy. And then again, Voorhees on that left side, he's looked pretty solid. Now in his third year in the league, people might not remember, he actually got drafted a couple of years ago, but spent his first year essentially as a redshirt because he got hurt during the combine. So I think this offensive line, look, they were not happy with their performance last year in that game. Ronnie Stanley in particular was very vocal about it in the locker room. So to me, I'm curious to see how that offensive line holds up against that Bills rush.
All right, last thing before I get you out of here. Obviously, a lot of work to do here on this final day before Sunday. The Bills have a big question at kicker right now. Tyler Bass started the week limited. He kicked in the preseason finale, been dealing with a pelvic injury, groin injury all summer. He doesn't practice yesterday, and right before practice, the Bills add 41-year-old veteran Matt Prater, who's coming off of a torn meniscus in his plant leg last year, missed most of last season at 41 years old, is going to be a bit of a wild card if he has to play in this game. You look over on the Baltimore side, and Justin Tucker has been there for so long. They're handing the job over to Tyler Loop. What have you seen from him, and what is the general feeling about him amongst the fan base and amongst the team?
I'll start with the fan base. I think they're maybe mildly confident. Of course, he had a 61-yarder that he made in the preseason finale against the Commanders, made 5 field goals in that game. He's looked the part. Look, there's no question about his leg strength, rookie out of Arizona, 6th-round pick. Basically, the Ravens identified him as one of a couple of guys that they thought were draftable. And he was actually the first kicker the organization has ever spent a draft pick on. Everybody else has been an undrafted free agent, or somebody they've signed. So this is the first time they've actually spent a draft pick on a kicker. Of course, we all know Justin Tucker, Ravens releasing him after those sexual misconduct allegations, and then the NFL suspending him for 10 weeks going into this season. So I'll be curious to see if he ends up somewhere on a roster later this year. But to me, Loop, looks confident. He's got plenty of leg strength. He's had a few misses. But I think overall he's looked pretty good. I think they actually talked to Tyler yesterday and Nick Moore, their long snapper, and Jordan Stout, their holder. And really they feel confident about the operation, and they feel really dialed in to where they are. Now, of course, making kicks in the preseason is one thing, and doing it in a regular season on the road in a hostile environment such as Mark Stadium is another. I'm sure he's happy that it's in September as opposed to December with the conditions. But he basically, he kind of channeled some Hoosiers when I talked to him. He said, look, it's still the same dimensions, 120 yards long, 53.5 yards wide. The uprights are still 18 feet 6 inches wide. So to me, at least for now, there seems to be an air of confidence about him. I do think he's a certainly capable kicker. We'll just have to see it when the gun goes off.
Man, we are 2 days away. I feel like we get through the dog days of training camp, and you start thinking about, man, I can't wait to cover a football game. And then all of a sudden you wake up one morning and it's here. Now, you're coming to Buffalo to cover the game, correct?
Yes, I'll be up in Buffalo this weekend. Yep.
We have wing plans.
Somebody asked me that yesterday, and it took me a minute. I should have been quicker to realize, it's pretty obvious, right? So I don't have wing plans. Do you have recommendations for wing plans?
Okay. So are you staying by the airport?
I am staying by the airport.
There is a 10-minute Uber drive from your hotel near the airport to a little place called Barbill North. And then also what I believe is a 10-minute Uber or rental car drive to Wingnuts, where we will actually be hosting a live event. It might be a little wild and crazy, and there are a lot of Bills fans in there tomorrow night. But either of those two options, you can't go wrong. And a little bit of an inside trader tip. anywhere you go for wings in Buffalo, not named Buffalo Wild Wings or Wingstop is going to be pretty good. So
yeah, you won't find me at a Buffalo Wild Wings or a Wingstop.
Okay,
You won't
cool.
find me there.
Brian, thank you so much. Let everybody know where they can find your work as we lead into the game Sunday.
Yeah, you can, of course, go to BaltimoreSun.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Brian Wacker 1 and Instagram Brian Wacker 1, Blue Sky Brian Wacker 1. Lots of sameness across there. So, but you can check it out, BaltimoreSun.com. I'll be there all weekend, and if you see me, come say hello.
Awesome stuff, man. Thank you so much. Travel safe, and we'll see you on Sunday.
Can't wait.